All right, but I'm not going to start over. So sorry about that. So yeah, the basics of the climate crisis. And so I would say, like, why does this matter? I would say one of the main reasons this matters is that it's having a significant effect on the food supply system. And so we're starting to see civil wars in places like Somalia as a result of several decades of drought. People don't just start civil wars for no reason. Usually it's a lack of resources. And so there's a great book called about the nature of war and as it relates to climate change. And so it's this when people are lacking food and water, they usually start fighting over scarce resources. And so if there were a severe drought or disruption in the global supply system, especially in the US or China, it could disrupt the global system and cause major problems and perhaps significant famines. And so that's one of the biggest concerns, besides just, what people normally think of in terms of suffering from a prolonged heat wave that are sort of annoying to our day-to-day routine. So
Erik, can I just ask you, can I pop in for 1 second?
yeah, absolutely.
When you talk about climate change with the context of yoga and in this conversation, are you speaking, because if you look at historical trends over millions of, years and years, the climate does change, right? But it's because this input and this change is because of the human factor. So I just wanted to figure out, like, are you saying that, like, without humans, climates would never go through like the normal fluctuation, or it's literally just because of the what we can't undo now?
Yeah, it's a great question. So it's sort of all a combination. It's such a complex system. And so certainly there's external factors like the changes in the sun cycle and the changes in the orbits around the sun, which has a very long-term effect on the climate system. There's changes in the internal system, like volcanoes, and sort of some other factors like large natural releases in especially with the glaciation sort of fluctuations over time. And then there's the human aspect, which I emphasize, right? That we're creating significant changes in the carbon life cycle, and so, there's a lot of reasons to be skeptical of the climate science in the way that they're doing the modeling, but their general consensus and conclusion is that because of the anthropomorphic, because of the human factor, that the climate is changing in a way that most likely is due to human causes. And the causes are essentially burning of the fossil fuels, the coal, the natural gas, the oil, but also land use changes, deforestation, primarily for agriculture. And so those are all significant factors. But yeah, so when I'm talking about it in terms of yoga, right? So yoga calls energy prana. So we could consider it as a pranic imbalance. And we can also think of it as an externalization of a crisis of the collective consciousness. And we're seeing in this age of the Kali Yuga, the age of ignorance and darkness, there's a tremendous amount, because of that underlying ignorance, right, that yoga seeks to heal and to remedy, that ignorance of the illusion of separateness. There's a lot more turbulence in people's consciousness. There's a lot more inner storms, and those storms are being externalized. And so there's a vortex of negativity, and we'll go into that a little bit more about how it is that sort of the psychology of the collective consciousness is contributing to climate change itself at a different level than just the carbon dioxide, but they're both very interconnectedness. And so that is what I would say the fatal flaw of the sort of the orthodox, the mainstream climate science, is that they're excluding the dynamics of consciousness, of Purusha. And because of that, their models are inherently incomplete and insufficient to actually deal and give us proper solutions. And climate change has been known since around 1800. And so this isn't a new thing. It's not a controversial thing. In 1800s, chemists were saying, like, you know, that they're noticing like tremendous amounts of steam coming out of the locomotives, and they're like, this has to have an effect. And so they started correlating the effect between the gases in the atmosphere and the effect on the climate. And that actually won a Nobel Prize in 1903 for that type of research. And even 56 years ago, in 1965, President Johnson gave a special message to Congress about the dangers of climate change. So we've known about this as a major political and global issue since the 1960s. And they even gave on-target estimations for the 2000s. But those warnings have obviously been ignored, and now the crisis is getting worse. And so now, yeah, we'll go a little bit more into like I'm going to be comparing sort of the orthodox like understanding of climate change and then like the more yogic perspective. And so, yeah, what is the climate change solution? So, you know, how can yoga impact the climate? You know, what sort of practices of yoga could apply to this sort of situation? Right. I don't know. I would be interested if anyone wanted to speak up right now for like initial thoughts for what you all might think. Like, how do you all think yoga can affect the climate system?
Well, if we, you know, think of yoga as unity and breaking away that ego and seeing us all as one, then we see that this like climate change, while you may not feel it's impacting you personally, if it's impacting some of us, it's impacting all of us. And if it's impacting certain parts of the world, then it's, you know, inherently impacting all of us. So even though, you know, from my privileged place in New York as a, you know, upper middle class white woman, maybe I'm not experiencing it at the same rate that people in third world countries, you know, Haiti, I think of, you know, with all of the stuff that's going on there.
Yeah.
But, you know, if some of us are experiencing it, we're all experiencing it.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, it's definitely one of these like things that unifies the world, similar to yoga. Yoga has that universal applicability, and so does climate change. And yeah, it is unifying the world. The climate change science is the largest scientific collaboration in the history of like human sort of human science and human civilization. It's an enormous collaboration among all the governments and basically all the relevant institutions around the world. And so it has that unifying factor. And that's a big reason like why I'm interested in combining these two principles, because we all share this environment. We're all earthlings living on Earth. And we're all, we all can relate to the teachings of yoga in the sense that beyond the separateness of ego, there are higher principles at work, and there are things that unite us all. And I think of yoga as an accelerated path to realize these sorts of higher truths. And yeah, and we'll go into more detail pretty soon on that. Yeah, absolutely. So it does affect everyone, but some people are feeling it more than others. And of course, in the Northeast, we're actually being more sort of buffeted from the impacts than almost anywhere else in the world. And so that's a unique situation, and it sort of creates a blind spot for people in the New England area. So,
Eric, I was gonna. Oh,
yeah.
Somebody else speaking?
Yeah, Melissa, did you want to give your thoughts on this?
Yeah, I was just going to say that, like, when you talk about like the energy shift, and like, so if we're responsible for like the primary carbon burning, that is the energy shift that's like causing this detrimental climate change, then maybe we can access our higher consciousness through yoga and put the same amount of energy out in the universe in some way, or in the atmosphere in some way, or focus our mind in some way, something. But I'm feeling like if we caused it, we should be able to change it as a collective, though. I feel like the problem is that we all collectively contributed to this by burning the fossil fuels, but it's harder to get everybody as a collective to meditate on healing the earth, or to even believe that it's going to be effective.
Absolutely. So
vibe on that for 1 second.
Yeah, please.
Yeah, thank you, Melissa, so much for saying that, because I do 100% believe that it is within our own consciousness to actually change all of that. And I think that as practitioners, as seekers, as teachers, I think that's kind of the goal that we're all kind of looking for, you know. And I think that greater consciousness, that greater good, that greater brightness can actually do a lot of things that right a lot of wrongs that the humankind has done. Yes, you know, there are a lot of scientific reasons why there is climate change, and a lot of those reasons are, you know, from beyond and have nothing to do with humankind whatsoever. But there are certainly a number of things within our own consciousness and with our own beings, with like our human beings within this planet Earth, that we can change, and we can unite others to help bring forth a consciousness that helps heal rather than detriment.
Absolutely. Yeah, 100%. Yeah, both of those comments are so on point. And I want to elaborate on everything that you all just said. So going back to Melissa's comment, like there, absolutely. So there, what we're going to talk about is we can access that higher consciousness, and we can put out that energy. And it's not necessarily our energy, but we can become a channel for a higher energy that can do things like purify the atmosphere. And there are ancient mantras in the Vedas that explicitly talk about purifying the atmosphere. When we can resonate in a certain energy frequency that can actually purify the atmosphere. And we know this by a variety of modern scientific methods. And there's amazing anecdotal evidence as well. That's I've seen it myself, and it's just beyond. To me, my skepticism has been shattered, and that's what my hope is to share with you, is that like these are real phenomena, that the power of yoga and meditation and consciousness can actually heal and purify the atmosphere, the oceans. It can accelerate photosynthesis, and it can have a healing effect. And so we do have that ability to put out that energy and to channel energies that can help to rebalance and revitalize these energies that are currently off balance. And you both pointed out, like, to the fact that this is a collective issue. And that's part of the yoga tradition, right? Is that unifying principle to bring people together, to be united in mind, in resolve as a community, for this project of civilization. That's part of the concluding hymns of the Rig Veda, which I highly recommend. And so it absolutely is within our ability. And I think Robbie's point is fantastic, right? A lot of the climate change talk gives people little hope, because it seems to be beyond our efficacy, our ability to have an impact. But what I'm going to try to propose here is that the most powerful action and thing that you can do to contribute to climate change is meditation. And it's not necessarily the actions like recycling. Of course, these are important, and not burning fossil fuels isn't an important component of dealing with this crisis, but also we need other solutions as well. And that includes having an awakened class of citizens who are engaged with this problem at a higher level. And that's what we're missing. And that's the nature of this crisis. And so I just want to sort of bring our attention to the Rig Veda. So the Rig Veda means, like, it's Sanskrit for praise the knowledge. And it's speaking of and asking for that unity that lies at the basis of all diversity. To solve this riddle of creation, this sort of, the soul of this unity, this mystery, right? And so this was an oral tradition for thousands and thousands of years, arguably starting as far back as 10,000 years ago. And so they're the heart of it are these very life-affirming hymns where the primary deity is Indra, and Indra is killing the deity Vitra. And Vitra is just the personification of drought and hardship. And all of the gods in the Vedas are just personifications of different aspects of nature as a way to help people relate to them. And so this anthropomorphism of nature emboldens the yogis, the sages, the seers, the rishis. And so it emboldens us to imagine ourselves in Indra's place, right? So while the yogis were reciting these hymns, there's this metamorphosis of consciousness. There's this altered state of consciousness where the yogi and the sage becomes Indra and has Indra's powers. And so the primary sort of story is the yogi as Indra ending these droughts and releasing these rains of fertility for civilization during at the start of our agricultural civilization. And so again, Indra is the source of rain and fertility, abundance, prosperity, and like all of the things that we need for survival. So and we'll go back to that, because after reading the Rig Veda, I'm like, oh my God, this is so important. Like the Rig Veda, which is arguably like the source of yoga, it's also the source document for Hinduism, Buddhism, Jainism, Baha'i faith. And of course, the Vedas merged into the Vedanta, which was, the synthesis of those, the highest teachings of the true self, of that unity. And so we'll return to that soon. And so what are the climate change solutions, right? It's a lot of people say, like, in the inconvenient truth, right? Changing light bulbs or energy efficiency or renewable energy, right? And it's these industrial solutions to an industrial problems. But the yoga of climate change is about, like, okay, we need a different mindset, as Einstein said, right? We need to solve a problem with a different state of consciousness than what created the problem. And so when people are talking about electric vehicles to solve the climate crisis, like, wait, we need this mass extractivism industry to extract all of the rare earth elements to build the batteries, to build the cars and the steel and then the infrastructure for the roads and the asphalt. And it's just an enormous project. It seems much more likely that people driving around in 3,000-pound vehicles might not be part of the solutions. We might need something else. And like, yeah, that makes a lot of money for the short-term economy, but perhaps we might need something else. A lot of and then the biggest example of the industrial solution is what's called geoengineering, right? And so that solar radiation management is the number one solution that the climate scientists have put forth, and that is called the Pinatubo option, which involves shooting up a tremendous amount of sulfur dioxide into the stratosphere to block out the sun, which simulates a volcano like Pinatubo. But we know that it would have significant unintended consequences, change precipitation patterns, very likely cause droughts, and might make the situation worse. And so hopefully we can avoid that. And that's why I wrote this book. We need a spiritual geoengineering. We don't need industrial geoengineering. Another example is carbon dioxide reduction. And so you might have heard like of these big machines that are trying to scrub the atmosphere of carbon dioxide. And it's funny to watch these companies get trolled online being like, oh, so you're talking about trees. But, you know, one of the climate change leaders, Bill McKibben, says the possibility of swift change lies in people coming together in movements large enough to shift the zeitgeist meaning sort of the spirit of the times. And so that is exactly what yoga is all about, right? Yoga is about bringing people together. And the fact that there are tens of millions of yogis just in the United States is incredibly promising for the yoga community to become more united, to be a leader for this situation. And that's the real opportunity here, that this can be an organizing principle. And so the heart of climate change yoga is about that samadhi with nature, that sort of unity consciousness, that dissolution of oneself, merging of consciousness with nature in a way that you're no longer looking at nature or perceive nature as separate from yourself, but you become one with it. And from that state of samadhi, you engage in what in Sanskrit is called the prakriti layas. The prakriti, right, is the underlying fabric of reality, which is opposite of purusha. And I'm going to be referring a lot to the concepts of purusha and prakriti. And so prakriti, and then the layas, right? It's just like the play of it. And so it's about using the will of this human instrument to help evolve nature itself through meditation and the other tools of yoga, right? So meditation, mantra, herbs, yajna is rituals. And so, you know, you're never going to hear climate scientists talk about yajna, at least not yet. And so here's a graph, just, you know, this is the basic climate science. This is the first modern indication that we knew something bad was happening. This is a very remote observatory in Hawaii measuring carbon dioxide levels in the atmosphere, showing them steadily increasing. And so this raised alarm bells in the 1960s and going forward. And so this just shows sort of that basic issue that we've now gone from about 180 to 280 parts per million average for the last 400,000 years. And they're able to reconstruct that with, like, you know, a variety of methods. I don't want to go too deep into this because I really want to focus on the yogic aspect. But basically, right, the composition of the atmosphere, the Earth hasn't seen this composition for at least 4 million years. And so it's beyond what humans have evolved for. And that's why this is arguably an existential crisis for humanity, because it's beyond our experience as a species, and it could potentially create an extinction scenario for the species. So let's just talk about, so right now, we're emitting about 50 gigatons. A gigaton is 1 billion tons of emissions per year. And emissions involve carbon dioxide, but also other things like methane and nitrous oxide and so on. But the problem is that that's not being balanced in the carbon cycle. And the primary mechanism for drawing down things like carbon dioxide is photosynthesis, right? And so there's about 20 gigatons per year being absorbed by the Earth, but, you know, that's a net, you know, we need another 30 gigatons. And so that's the crisis, right? Where the Earth can't handle the amount of emissions that we're spewing out. Like, we're treating the atmosphere like a sewer. And so there are a couple, the mainstream scientists say that, you know, well, if we increased soil carbon sequestration and really focused hard on increasing soil content in soils, we could sequester another 5 gigatons. Like, all right, well, that's great. We need to do it, but it's not enough. Same with reforestation. It's like, yeah, we can sequester a little bit more, a few more gigatons, but we need a lot bigger scale solutions. And so the fundamental energy imbalance is that there's an excess of about 2,200 gigatons of carbon dioxide that have been emitted in the last 260 years. And then we're adding another 50 each year. So that's the fundamental nature of the underlying energy imbalance, is that excess of 2,200 gigatons. And there's no proposal for with sort of sequestering that. And so that's what climate change yoga, I'm going to propose that yoga can actually help accelerate the carbon cycle and help sequester the excess amount of carbon that is in the atmosphere and in the oceans. And so this is just another one of those basic graphs you're going to see all over the place. You know, the Earth is heating up a lot more than usual. We're seeing record-breaking heat waves all over the world, and it's increasing every year. So we'll just quickly go past this, but I just want to draw your attention to the fact that, you know, the biggest changes are happening at the poles. And so the Arctic recently spiked over 20 degrees Celsius, about 36 degrees above average Fahrenheit. And so this is incredibly problematic, obviously. And so just another graph showing the temperature imbalances and increasing. And this is an issue that's often overlooked, is that when we emit carbon dioxide into the atmosphere, about 80% of it ends up into the oceans. And so the oceans are heating up and becoming acidified much greater than the atmospheres. And so it's sort of out of sight, out of mind, which is incredibly problematic. And so because of this, the nature of this dynamic, we can expect sort of lag times in the effects. So that means that, you know, even if we stopped emitting emissions right now, the oceans would keep warming, keep acidifying, and the sea levels would keep rising, regardless of whether industrial civilization stopped right now. And so this is from the book Drawdown, which is an incredibly great compilation and collaboration. It's been integrated into the United Nations process about all of those standard orthodox mainstream solutions to the climate change crisis. And when I talk about climate change yoga, I'm saying we need all of this plus the yogic solution. All right. And so we can't just ignore all of these things. All of these things are essential. We're not sort of transcending and excluding, we're transcending and including all of these sort of material level solutions. And so, but something that's frequently not considered is refrigerant management, right? How do we keep all of our food cold? Well, there's little refrigerants that are hundreds of times more potent as a greenhouse gas that warms the earth than carbon dioxide. And so if we don't dispose of refrigerants in the proper way, it's going to be catastrophic. And so that's something that people normally don't consider. So I just want to bring that to your awareness. And then you'll notice that, and then if you combine 6 and 7, educating girls and family planning, if you combine that, that's the #1 solution, right? So educating girls and family planning are incredibly important, and that relates to population pressures, and population, of course, has a direct impact on the amount of consumption just in general. And so we're just beyond our carrying capacity, right? And so the Earth will not be able to sustain the amount of population that we have at these levels of consumption. And so we either need less population or less, less consumption. But we also need a few of these other sort of renewable energy solutions as well. And just another quick way that people are looking at this problem, looking at it in terms of different sectors like electricity, food and ag, industry, transport, buildings, and then the sinks, right? So if we improve degraded land, if we protect and restore ecosystems and shift agriculture, it's like, yes, we absolutely need to do all of this. And I would say that the yogis can help accelerate and expand those bubbles for the land sinks. And so that's going to be at the heart of the yogic solution, is this revitalization, regeneration of the biosphere. But we need to address all of the other issues as well. And so this goes just another way to look at how people are thinking about the problem. They're called wedges. We need a lot of different wedges to solve this problem. And so each wedge is a different solution being proposed, except that I would say that about a quarter of this, it's what's not included is Arctic methane, is large reservoirs of Arctic methane being released. There's no solution for that. There's no solution for the ocean acidification problem. And we need significant large-scale negative emissions, which are even assumed in the climate change models, but they're not really talked about. So they're assuming that large-scale negative emission technologies are going to come online, and none of them have been proven. And so that's incredibly problematic, and it's not even represented in these sorts of graphs. And so this next slide is my own way of drawing out the sort of the wedge solution nature of the problem. And so you'll see we need a solution to deal with Arctic methane. Arctic methane caused the last mass extinction crisis around 55 million years ago. Large reservoirs were released from the Arctic, and that's happening again now. And why is it happening? It's happening because sea level rise is a change in pressure, there's a change in temperature. And so those reservoirs, which were stabilized, are becoming unstable, and they're becoming released. And I have some images of that soon. And so going back to, I think it was Melissa talked about, like, well, the climate's been changing a lot, right? And so this is the largest, most comprehensive temperature history of the Earth that we have, composed of things like sediment cores, tree rings, ice cores. And so what it shows is dramatic changes in ups and downs in the climate and weather system up until around 10,000 years ago. So what happened 10,000 years ago? Like, why did this stabilize? Well, my theory with climate change yoga is that it's not a coincidence that yoga emerged right when the climate stabilized around 10,000 years ago. The Rig Vedic hymns were explicitly about creating climate stability. The yogis were calling themselves guardians of the seasons, masters of nature. The hymns were about literally about creating stability, very repetitive hymns and mantras about purifying the atmosphere, about releasing regular rains for their crops, for prosperity. And what do you know? Climate stabilized. And what do you know? We've lost those traditions and the climate's become unstabilized. Perhaps we should take these traditions more seriously. And that's the crux of it, right? So what was the most important knowledge that our ancestors passed forward to future generations from 10 to 5,000 years ago? It was the Rig Veda. They were literally the hymns to create climate stability. And this is like the elephant in the room, right? This contains the formula that we can use to restabilize the climate. And so what is that formula? It's the principle of the balancing of these elements, right? And so we're experiencing, and so this is going back to the fundamental nature of the climate crisis, is that there's too much energy, there's too much heat, there's too much agni. And so what's the opposite of fire, right? It would be water, and the principle of cooling. And so in yoga, it's called soma. And soma has a wide variety of meanings, but in the Rig Veda, it's clearly the principle, it's the bliss principle that connects the yogi with God consciousness to facilitate that stability, that environmental harmony, creating the harmony that we need for survival itself. And it's so explicit in the Rig Veda. Like, I really wish that more people would read it, but no one reads it, right? It's 2,000 pages of incredibly repetitive hymns. But anyways, like, the Rig Veda talks about this balancing of, like, you're praying to the fire, you're drinking the soma drink, you're connecting with Indra, you're providing rains for the community. And then yoga develops over time to literally explain how that is possible. Yoga is scientific shamanism in that it explains how to achieve reliable states of altered consciousness and altered sort of unity consciousness, that samadhi state with the environment. And that's what we need for survival. And of course, the goal of yoga is not necessarily wealth, prosperity, abundance, these materialistic desires. Of course, the goal of yoga is this moksha, freedom, liberation, samadhi, transcendence, in self-realization. But on the way to self-realization, as the Bhagavad Gita would say, let's be helpful, let's be of selfless service, let's try to engage with the world on this planet that we find ourselves in, this very interesting situation. And this is an amazing opportunity. This is the biggest challenge that we have as a community, to come together to literally evolve our consciousness, to engage with this problem at a higher level. And whether or not we engage with this is whether or not we descend further into chaos and death, or whether we sort of transition from the Kali Yuga, age of ignorance and darkness, into the Satya Yuga, age of truth and light and in abundance. That yoga, and that's the path of yoga, right? It leads to that Satya Yuga. So in a big part of it as well, like part of that formula to create climate stability are these, what are called the yajnas, those, the rituals. And that's a big part of the Vedas. It's very ritualistic. It's about these incredibly repetitive practices and sadhanas to connect to help us achieve that altered consciousness and to connect in a transcendental way with nature. And so it's about the balancing of the duality that we find ourselves in, right? The principles of Shiva and Shakti, which are the principles of consciousness and power. And so it's literally about the power of consciousness. And it's about balancing the Purusha and the Prakriti, which is also like the concepts of consciousness and matter. And so yoga, the genius of yoga is its incredibly sophisticated articulation of these principles of higher consciousness. In its incredibly idealistic sort of philosophy and tradition. Oh, so I might skip this. Right, and so it's about connecting with your Atman, and it's about like, you have the power to be a healer, you have the power of samyama. And so I just want to pause here on level 4. So what I'm talking about with climate change yoga is described in the Yoga Sutras in chapter 4 on the siddhis. And the siddhis are the powers of consciousness, which result from the mastery of the last 3 limbs of yoga, dharana, dhyana, samadhi. When you master concentration, meditation, and samadhi, you have these powers of consciousness called siddhis, and you can change the weather. You can have telepathy, you can bilocate, you can do all sorts of crazy stuff. But as the Yoga Sutras would say, don't get distracted. That's not the goal here. The goal is samadhi, and that's the last chapter of the Yoga Sutras. So while all of this might be interesting and fun, there is a danger to it. It needs to be recognized. Playing around with changing the weather and the climate is not the goal of yoga, but it can be something that we do as a selfless service to humanity on a larger scale. And I would argue it's the highest thing that we can do at this moment in time, at this place in time, on this planet Earth, in the year 2021. This is the largest problem that we have. If you want to try to help reduce the suffering of the most amount of people, you would be engaged in this project. So, and then you would use this project to transcend it. But don't turn into a rainbow yet. I want you to stick around. so you can help with this. But if you do, that's all good. It's freedom and moksha. Go for it. All right, so let's go back a little bit to this idea that the climate crisis is an externalization of the collective consciousness, right? And so this has to do with the psychosis. And what is psychosis? Psychosis, like the technical term, is just it's a miss. Like you're not looking at reality correctly, and so this points to the ignorance, right? The fear, anger, anxiety, separateness. These are all illusions that sort of veil the reality of our underlying nature of Sat Chit Ananda, the truth, existence, bliss, in that oneness. And so knowing about the climate crisis causes and so this is the paradox, right? And so like if I wanted to, I could make you all like break down in like an existential crisis, but that's not helpful. The more you learn about it, the more you realize like, oh my God, we're super fucked. And so that causes hypertension, anxiety, anger, frustration, exhaustion. Like Robbie said, like this idea of like, oh my God, this is too big of a problem. I can't even do anything. Like, why bother? This sort of nihilism that's pervading society. And so this toxic storm of psychic energies is real. It is measurable. When you develop your perception of subtle energies, you can literally see these energies, and they are literally contributing to the climate crisis. These energies are not confined. And this is one of the primary problems with Western modern science. They think that for example, they think that our thoughts are contained within our head. They're not. They expand out. Their energy, their light, and they're perceptible by yogis who've developed that ability. And our thoughts literally expand out into the atmosphere, into our environment, and they have effects. And if they're negative energies, if they're tamasic and rajasic, they're going to have chaotic effects and they're not going to be positive. If it's sattvic energies, it's going to have a harmonizing effect, that there's going to be healing. And that's exactly what we need. And so this whole project is about the sattvication of the yogi to enhance the sattvic emissions, which can have that healing and purifying effect on whatever the focus is. So when you have the sattvic emissions and you're focused on purifying the atmosphere, you can purify the atmosphere. And so it's about, and this is one of the paradoxes, right? It's about developing that strong intention to create a change. Whereas arguably, especially in Buddhism, right? Like the goal is to transcend desires and transcend our engagement with sort of the illusion of duality. But this is saying like, we're here in this place, this here and now, we accept the duality, we engage with it. And when we develop that intention, as the Yoga Sutras describe, which is like the scientific way to do this, you have harmonious healing effects and you can improve. And so that going back to the definition of yoga, it's about that development of both our mental, psychological capacity and our physical capacity. When we improve the software of the mind and the hardware of the body, we optimize our capacity and develop these abilities, we can engage at a much higher level. We can have these larger scale effects. And that's what we need right now. We need people to take this seriously, to develop themselves for the selfless service. It's like, yes, it has an incredibly profound effect on yourself. You're going to have awakening experiences. It's going to lead to your spiritual evolution. But the reason that we need people to do this is for the evolution of consciousness on Earth itself. And on a larger scale, the consciousness of the cosmos itself. And you're engaging in sort of the cosmogenesis in the event horizon. Like how big of a concept can we bring this to? But I digress. Because it's
Eric, can I ask you a quick question?
Yeah, absolutely.
Have you seen anything that's merging what you're saying and like your theories about yoga and climate with like things that like scientists would actually back, like how, and I'm not saying that I want scientists to back this. I'm just saying that it might be easier for like adoption and like whatever. But the point is that like quantum theory is like the same thing, right? So like
Yeah.
in the observer effect and all that stuff. So like, have you, in your research, have you found anybody that has like tried to link quantum theory with like, and the observer effect with like meditation on the climate? Has there been anything like that or not really?
Absolutely. Yes, there has. And I'm going to get to that. I have a few slides on it coming up. So absolutely. So they have studied this a little bit, not enough. And I would say like the studies have been relatively small scale, and we need to scale them up. And that's sort of the purpose of saying this. Like, we know that this is possible. We know that it's possible because of reliable authorities, right? In like, even like yoga talks about, like, how can you know if something's true? It's like, well, the direct experience or reliable authorities or a few other ways of knowing. But we do know that these are real phenomena, and I'm going to explain that. Absolutely. It's such an important point to make. And so I just want to just reiterate one last point here. It's like the psychosis is this type of schizophrenia. It's the delusion of separateness. It's the ignorance of our oneness and unity, and that quantum entanglement with the energies around us, and our ability to engage with those energies. And so, yeah, let's get into, we're going to go deep dive into yoga as the medicine for solving this crisis. And so we're going to talk about yajna, rituals, and balancing the life energies, mantras, austerities. So these are all this is sort of just a list of modalities of yoga that are directly related to what we're talking about. Ayurveda. So I'll just pause on Ayurveda. So Ayurveda is literally, as you might know, about balancing our doshas. In doshas, just represent, each dosha is a combination of 2 of the 5 elements, and it's about balancing all of the 5 elements within ourselves. And what we're talking about is, well, first we need to heal ourselves, and then we can heal others in the environment. And so Ayurveda helps us with that healing of ourselves. And when we heal ourselves, there's literally, like we said, there's literally a ripple effect into the environment. And so the yidam, going up one, the yidam and deity rituals, and that's just a way, it's like depending on your dharma, some of these will work for you and others won't. And so yidam is about praying to specific gods and asking them for help, to help us solve this crisis. And that can be incredibly effective. And there's some amazing anecdotal evidence. One of the Dalai Lama's, right-hand man, this Rinpoche would literally travel around with the Dalai Lama to change the weather, to make sure that the Dalai Lama's speaking events always had the perfect weather. And there's an amazing book about that called The Rainmaker. And he describes what he does and how he does it. It's a very short book. It's a very simple principle, but he's developing a relationship with the consciousness and the gods of the weather, developing that relationship and having an impact on it, and devoting himself to that practice. And so that's a really great, and so, right, so it's not scientific, it's still what's called the gray literature. It's outside of the peer reviewed process, but it's a very powerful example of a modern person who engages in this type of practice. In pranayama, of course, like if someone who masters pranayama can control anything. Swami Vivekananda talks about that in his book Raja Yoga, one of the top 10 books on yoga, I would say. And then mantras, of course, are like the primary tool in the yoga toolkit. When we chant mantras repeatedly ad nauseum, right, we literally vibrate those frequencies. And so if you vibrate certain frequencies, like, you're going to have a profound effect. And so just engaging in a mantra meditation authentically for even just like a month or two, like it's going to literally change your consciousness, your perception of reality. It's going to change who you are, and it's going to change your ability to engage with the world in a higher way. But that's not part of the modern culture, right? Who is going off in to master these sorts of practices? But that's exactly what we need, and this is the crisis that we're facing. We need people to take these practices seriously. And so this is just going back to that. The primary issue is this one of our perception of reality. And so it's this tension between ancient mysticism, modern science. Science is literally the study of the subject and object. Which is based on that flawed assumption that there is a separateness of the subject and object. And so I would say that it's a fundamental problem with the project of science itself when it doesn't take into consideration things like mysticism and yoga, which is universal to all spiritual and religious traditions. And so it's that difference between unity and separateness, spirituality and materialism. And so scientism is literally the modern religion of the atheistic civilization that's unwilling to consider these sorts of yogic solutions, and it's in a domineering way. They're literally suppressing wisdom traditions like yoga, but for example, they make illegal psychedelic mushrooms, which is part of the yoga tradition. And so they're literally making illegal one of the tools of yoga for people to achieve higher states of consciousness. One of the herbs, holism, and it's suppressed in many other ways, right? The church literally stopped the mystery traditions. In around 400 CE, there was a genocide of the Native Americans, in not only of the Native Americans, but their wisdom traditions, and their tradition of relating with the earth in a much different way than the colonizers. And so because we've lost that tradition, we've lost that wisdom, we're now going forward in that ignorance, and that's part of the crisis. And so I'm sure you've all seen this graph. It's just pointing out the fact that, starting with the 5 elements, we ascend in consciousness to the gunas, and it's about that balance of sattva, raja, tama. But the emphasis here is that emphasis on sattva, of course. That's one of the goals of yoga, is to increase our sattvic nature. And recognizing, developing that relationship. When we engage in just regular meditation, we develop a different relationship with the nature of the mind and the ego and the self. And then once we transcend the mind, we connect with our higher self, in sort of the larger mind. In modern psychology, perhaps you would describe it as this: the average person lives in the liminal realm, and there's a subliminal and superliminal. So the yogis are describing, the superliminal is the buddhi, is that prakriti and purusha. And so it's about engaging with the climate at the level of prakriti and purusha. And so that's a really big point here. And so purusha consciousness is the fundamental way that we need to engage with this challenge and opportunity. And so purusha, of course, is that all-pervasive consciousness. And in prakriti, when we engage in climate, so the highest expression of climate change yoga would be literally merging with the climate, with that prakriti and purusha, with the field of consciousness, and then having an effect. And so it's a skill that we can develop, in the yoga sutras, and the yoga tradition describes how to do that. And so that's what we're seeking. All right, so what would the yogis say about developing a sustainable lifestyle? All right, and so they would say, well, we need to just stop being so hyperactive, right? Why are we burning all these fossil fuels, to go like I guarantee, so there's this principle called the Pareto principle. You can get 80% of the effect with 20% of the effort. And in general, this 80-20 rule has wide applicability. I guarantee that, or I don't guarantee, but I bet that 80% of the activity in burning of fossil fuels is completely unnecessary and probably even dangerous and counterproductive, right? It's probably not necessary. And so just like calming down, resting, and like engaging in a more contemplative practice like yoga would be incredibly beneficial for the world if that were to happen on a larger scale. Right, not burning fossil fuels is probably like one of the most important things we can do. And so the yogis would say, right, avoid busy days, heavy work, stress, a light diet, mostly vegan. And right, so animal agriculture is arguably responsible for over 50% of greenhouse gas emissions when you include things like refrigeration, deforestation, and growing food for the animals. So don't drink alcohol, don't do drugs, all of that. Read Vedic literature, of course, the Vedas would say that. But you're right, and the Veda just means knowledge, and it's about the solution to this is that higher concept of knowledge, in trying to hold or moderate our sexual life and just a moderate life in general. And so it's about like having simple living and high thinking, right? In a way, it's almost voluntary poverty, which vegetarianism sort of represents. And it's about all of these practices, right? Just represent ways that the yogi can raise their vibrations. And when you raise your vibrations, you're raising the planet's vibrations and the vibrations of the collective consciousness, which this image represents. And so for scientifically, that represents like there's an electromagnetic field that surrounds the earth. There's an electromagnetic field that surrounds the heart, the brain, the human body, and it grows. And so climate change yoga would say you're trying to expand your electromagnetic body and perception up to the planetary scale. In yoga, in the tradition of yoga, would be like, well, why stop there? Let's go interplanetary, let's go interstellar, let's go cosmic. But for the climate change yoga, for this limited theory, we'll stick to the planetary level. But interplanetary travel is an open secret in yoga. So just a shout out to that idea. Anyways. So energy healing. So yogis are essentially energy healers, right? And we know, so just to speak to the science of this, there is legit very good scientific data and research on the effects and benefits of energy healing, and that it's effective for a wide range of conditions, things like Alzheimer's, HIV and AIDS, anxiety, insomnia, arthritis, back pain, autism, memory, burns, cancer, mood disorders, PTSD, depression, diabetes, drug addiction, high blood pressure, and on and on and on. And so what's happening, right? What's happening is there's a high amplitude of theta. We can measure the brainwave, and when energy healers are having a healing effect on a patient, there are spikes in theta. And so the goal as an energy healer is to develop that ability to reliably access that state of consciousness in which theta brainwaves are dominant. Right. And this is just like the objectification of our states of consciousness, but it's cool that we have these instruments that can actually measure this. But the goal here, right, is to develop the intention, visualization, and willpower to develop our ability to project this consciousness, this light energy, this sattva, to have a measurable impact. So yeah, I just want to say that again, right? So the goal here is to develop our intention. And when we combine our intention with visualization, so if we have a very strong intention for healing the earth, we can visualize that, like literally holding the earth and pervading it with white light, healing light, and we have an incredibly strong willpower to engage in this practice, it's going to have an effect. And it's because of that quantum nature of quantum entanglement, non-locality of consciousness, and so on. And so the yogis describe it, and the modern science is finally catching up with it. And so energy healing is just like sort of this level one, right? We need energy, we need yogis to be energy healers on a planetary scale. That's the heart of what we're talking about. And so this is just a fun little visual of some modern scientists trying to objectify an advanced meditator's state of consciousness. And so, yeah, there's these devices about, that measure our brainwaves. And I would suggest that, like, we have the tools, let's use them. This can accelerate our ability to, having live biofeedback mechanisms can help someone develop that skill, right? It's like, oh, so I was just in theta, I'll just do more of that, and I can see it and it can help. And so, like, we can use these tools to literally help train ourselves to develop these abilities. And so what's happening is when we meditate, right, we're going into a calm state. So I just want to review this real quick because it's so important. When we're drinking coffee and we're interacting in our day-to-day lives, we're in beta. We're primarily in the beta state. And beta is what our culture prioritizes. When we start to meditate and do yoga, we start to calm down and we start to enter more of the alpha state. And so there's what's called the alpha bridge. When you develop that ability to drop into alpha, you have a bridge to theta and delta. In theta and delta is when you have that experience of that infinite in oneness with all beings. And it's that profound inner experience and connection with the infinite in that interbeingness. And so when you have that interbeingness in theta and delta, and you're a climate yogi focused on purifying the atmosphere, that's when we're going to start to see real effects. And we do, like, there are people who do this, and we just need more people to do it. And I'll talk about that in a minute. So, but yeah, we can objectify states of consciousness, like what's happening when there's energy healing. We literally know this through EEGs, and we see these high amplitudes of theta. And so that corresponds sort of to the microvolts of the mind. And when you do things like yoga, you're literally changing your brain. You're changing the neurocircuitry to become a healer. All right, so this is an amazing book, Living in the Heart. Highly recommend it. Very short, right to the point. Drinvalo is level 4 or 5 spiritual teacher. So sacred space within the heart. That's the heart of it all. The earth is literally within our heart in a holographic fractal relationship. So the earth is both within our heart and without. It's internal and external. The yogis tried to describe this in lots of different ways, but this is confirmed. And so what's happening is that there's this electromagnetic field within our heart that's measurable. And this just points out, right? We can measure these fields. And the average person has 250 hertz. That's the energy around their heart. When you become a yogi and you actually do these practices, your energy, the energy around your heart dramatically expands to 200,000 hertz. All right. And so the effects of yoga and meditation are profound, and that has dramatic implications. So, and it's essentially corresponds to your state of consciousness. Do you want to live at 250 or 200,000? The answer is obvious. And so it's literally about the evolution of our consciousness. And so literally when we expand our heart field, we're becoming unified with the surrounding environment. And that's when we can use our sattvic emissions and vibrations and energy consciousness to have effects. We can't do it if we're at 250. We need yogis at 200 hertz, basically. So this book has some guided meditations, which are excellent, and they're also free on YouTube. So check out Living in the Heart. I was actually inspired by him in this book to go write this book in Peru, where you can tap into the earth energies. And so this is just another visual representation, right? The human body has this toroidal field of energy. So does the earth. We are the microcosm of the macrocosm. And this also has applicability to the cosmos itself. And so this is what we're talking about. Like when we have cosmic consciousness, like our energy body is literally merging with the cosmic energy body. And that's the ultimate experience of Ananda, that bliss body. When you can feel the universe vibrating as your own body. I've only had that once or twice. Well, not once. I've had it twice, but that's not necessarily the goal. But it is, it's an incredibly profound experience. It makes you realize, like, holy shit, there's more to consciousness and reality than what we think. And this has very important implications and applications for
Erik,
for being on Earth. Yes.
Why are we then building the solar and doing the electric cars and building astronauts so that we can get away from the Earth? Like, why are we doing all of these things if we already know? You know what I mean? Like, I don't understand. It's kind of like, it's like a sabotage, but like, who's sabotaging us? I don't get it.
Yeah. Well, I think that, like, in general, I would say that it's like the people who are doing that have that scientific industrial mindset that created the problem, and they're just trying to create technological solutions, which, I think there is some place for it, but it's not nearly enough. And I would say in general, it's a large part of like the ignorance, and perhaps people have like a good heart and their heart's in the right place, but they're not necessarily doing the right thing. Like Elon Musk trying to send spaceships to Mars or whatever, right? Like if he can't figure out how to terraform Mars with the powers of consciousness, he's not going to get anywhere. And as far as I know, like he's not at that level of consciousness. So hopefully people like Elon Musk who have the resources that could catalyze and facilitate people coming together at a higher level, like hopefully they come on board and they realize.
I feel like he and Branson and everybody, like, we need somebody with the funding that can just put the money behind all of this brain research and all of the things that we're talking about, because that's really what it is. It's just there's no money to prove that it's actually like efficient.
Yeah. And Ralph Nader has a great book about like only the rich will save us. Right. And so it definitely goes back to this idea that like this incredibly shitty situation of extreme inequality is exacerbating the problems. We do need more resources dedicated to this. Absolutely. The Economist suggests that there's on the scale of like $50 trillion just in unutilized assets, just sitting in bank accounts waiting for good investment opportunities. So hopefully, some of that money can find its way to these sorts of projects. But yeah, absolutely, we need larger scale projects, and that'll be the conclusion. I'm about 10 slides away from the end, and the end essentially is like we need a mass collaboration of synchronized meditations. So I'll just give away the secret here. When people meditate in a synchronized way, the energies are amplified, and that can have the power to address the imbalances that we were talking about in the carbon cycle. And again, like we're not necessarily generating the energy, but we're channeling divine energies and doing it for the highest purpose, for the greatest good. Let's build up to that with a few more points, because I'm getting a little bit more into the science with like why this is so convincing, at least to me. So the earth body, right? So knowing nature and the earth as the extension of oneself. So that's the state of samadhi, right? That's the goal of the Yoga Sutras. And so this is just another point of like, how can you engage with this at a higher level? Well, our diet has a profound effect on our ability to engage with this. The average person who eats meat and dairy and sugar, they have 1,000 units of biophotons. So all of the cells in our body are emitting energy and light. The average person emits 1,000. A newborn baby emits 40,000, but over time, right, the shitty modern industrial diet decreases their light emissions and their consciousness. This is direct correlation. When you start eating a vegetarian diet or vegan diet, your emissions might increase to 23,000. So a huge jump, up 23 times. And then once you adopt like a live food diet, it dramatically is enhanced to 83,000 units. And then the live food, wild and fasting. So this book, Spiritual Nutrition, is something that I followed for about 5 years to do many 15-day water fasts, a few dry fasts, no food, no water. When you do that, you can directly perceive your chakras, your subtle energy body, and have reliable states of Satchit and Nanda. And you can engage in these practices at a higher level, but you're also emitting more light, right? Like your sattva is dramatically enhanced, and you can be more like this is how you be more effective as a yogi, by taking things like your diet to enhance our physiology, because yoga is about enhancing our psychology and our physiology, our software and our hardware. And so when we start to do things like fast, we're purifying the body, like we're literally becoming a crystal, a superconductor for the divine. And so, yeah, unfortunately, standard American diet is completely devastating for the collective consciousness. And we need more people to adopt not just a vegan diet, but more raw foods. In this book, Spiritual Nutrition, like a lot of people might think that raw food isn't appropriate for themselves, but spiritual nutrition is a combination of Ayurveda and showing like, if you do it right, it can work, and you can transcend sort of the doshas. You can transcend your physiology, and you can have that feeling of moksha. And this, like, you can't eat your way to God, you can't fast your way to God, but it's such a critical, like, our food is literally the most important connection that we have with the earth. And the more local and authentically organic that we eat, the healthier we are and the higher capacity we'll have. So this is one of my favorite points, right? What's the science of it? How can we accelerate the photosynthetic process? Well, we are literally emitting a spectrum of energy that plants absorb for photosynthesis. So our light is literally a source of photosynthesis for plants. And you know, like we've said before, like there are quantum effects. Our light is not just local to around our immediate body, it's non-local. We can project our light through intention, willpower, and visualization to non-local environments to have effects. And this has been studied and proven. And so we need to scale it up. And when we engage in this synchronized with other yogis, the effects are amplified quite dramatically. It's similar to sound waves. And so we emit light in the 200, 800 nanometer wavelength. Plants absorb 400 to 700 nanometer. And meditation has been proven in dozens of studies around the world to enhance photosynthesis. So this is a settled issue, but we need to take it out of the laboratory. We need to apply this literally on large scale ecosystems at this point. And I would suggest that my intuition is that if large scale meditations were to visualize their energies going into the oceans to help with the phytoplanktons, right? So we think of trees as being the lungs of the earth. That's only half of our lungs. That's our right lung, or the trees. Our left lung, or the are the plankton in the oceans. They literally produce half of the oxygen that we're breathing right now. And we could literally saturate the oceans with our light and help accelerate their vitality. So that's part of my thesis. All right, so reducing solar radiation, right? We talked about how geoengineering proposals like solar radiation management are trying to block the sun. Well, how about we meditate? Let's stop, replicating volcanoes, and let's try something else. And there were long scale studies. So this is from a book called Creating Peace by Being Peace by Dr. Gabriel Cousins, who also wrote that other book, Spiritual Nutrition. And so he cited this great research paper, The Power of Thoughts to Influence the Sun. All right, and so this was a 35-year experiment, which concluded that the global meditations decreased sunspots over 30%. And the sunspots were correlated with other things like an increase in crime rates, in sort of general chaos, right? It's sort of this tamasic, rajasic energy. And so I would say, like, so who here has ever done a sun salutation? It's like, well, yeah, we've all done sun salutations, but who here has actually done like an authentic sunset, like saluting the sun, engaged with samadhi with the sun, right? With Savitur, like the sun god, engaged at that like level 5 peak samadhi level. Like, we need a yoga practice that like takes this seriously, that knows that we can achieve this sort of unity consciousness with even powers as big as the sun, and to pray for this collaboration. And so this depends on your dharma, right? Whether you want to engage with it as literally being the sun, or as praying to the sun as being an entity that's external, with a consciousness who can respond to our prayers. And so there's slight nuances and variations about how you engage with this practice. But meditation is known as a solar radiation technology, which has been proven by this amazing 35-year study, meditation study. Methane dissociation. So again, we emit light in that 10 to 400 nanometer spectrum. And so we can project that into the Arctic. And if we did, it would break apart water, H2O, which creates these reactive hydroxyl radicals, OH, that can destroy methane, the CH4, which is, depending on the time scale, to 25 to 100 times stronger than carbon dioxide. But the basic point here, right, is that there are massive reservoirs of methane that are becoming destabilized in the Arctic, and they're exploding, like on this top graph, creating huge craters in Siberia. They're being released in all of these Arctic lakes, which you can light on fire. So it's like just a dramatic demonstration of the methane. But we can like literally project our energy in a way that has a chemical effect, and we know this. And this is something that can be demonstrated in a laboratory as well on a small scale. And so what I'm saying again is like, okay, we know this is true. We need to scale this up. Time is of the essence. Situation's catastrophic. We need people to unite and develop these abilities and skills, take this serious, and engage with this at a higher level, because that was the original purpose of yoga and of yogis. So the yogis were literally the sages, the seers, the rishis, and they were held in a higher regard. When you think of the caste system, the yogis and the sages were literally more important than the political class or political caste, right? So they were helping the political caste maintain stability and power. Like without the yogis, the politicians would have no power. And so we've lost that type of social hierarchy, for lack of a better word. And because we've lost that sort of tradition, we've lost that stability. And we've lost that ability for the yoga and the spiritual community to have the power, that fundamental, elemental power that we need for the continuity of civilization itself. So cooling the earth with clouds. So this would probably be the easiest way, to, in the short term, if we need to cool down the earth. That's why they're thinking about shooting sulfur dioxide up to simulate volcanoes, because they're like, oh shit, if the earth heats up, what can we do to cool it? And their solutions are terrible. But we know, and so this is what I referred to earlier, the Rainmaker, the story of this Rhinepoke was, he worked with the Dalai Lama, and he could change the weather, and it was, undeniable, and he did it repeatedly and reliably, and like, this is a skill, and he describes what he did and how he did it. And this is part of that Vedic, Vedantic, yogic tradition. Even though he's a Buddhist, it's still part of this tradition, and it's using the same language. So, right, and so meditation can have an effect on temperature, water cycles, storms, polar ice, glaciers, ocean acidification. Like, there's when you're merged in samadhi with Purusha and Prakriti, with that underlying fabric of reality, you can literally have an effect on anything. All right, and so let's just want to touch real quick again on Soma Yoga. So it's a psychedelic medicine. There's a great new book, How to Change Your Mind, by Michael Pollan. There's this really fun book, Krishna and the Sky with Diamonds, on chapter 11, the sort of the peak chapter of the Bhagavad Gita. And again, Soma is the cooling principle. We need to cool down the earth. We need to cool down our consciousness. And the Soma in the Rig Veda is of the most significance. It's literally part of every hymn, on every page. It's how the yogis connect with divinity. And it is also, Soma is the king of the plants, king of the medicine, king of the waters. And it is also sort of the psychedelic herb. And so the Yoga Sutras even says, like, how do you achieve samadhi, right? It's like meditation, asceticism, and herbs. And so it doesn't result in that long-term groundedness in samadhi, but it helps people know what it is. It helps people dissolve the boundaries of separateness and ego, to come into contact with that divinity and unity and oneness, and to help develop and accelerate their spiritual evolution, except it's illegal, right? And so, like, that's terrible for civilization. But I just want to point out that, like, humans literally evolved from fungi. Humans have been around for 1.5 billion years. And it's not a coincidence that people who do mushrooms within this context have cosmic consciousness. And so the main thesis in How to Change Your Mind by Michael Pollan is that we're now lacking that cultural container to have this experience, to do a psychedelic. For thousands and thousands and thousands of years, the yogis were the ones who would facilitate a psychedelic experience to help guide people towards higher realizations, to help align people with their dharma, with their purpose in life, and to go about life in like more inspired and with greater clarity, and knowing, like, having that direct connection with divinity. And then the church stopped those traditions because the church wanted to be the intermediary between people and God, and perhaps other reasons. But those traditions have now stopped. We don't have those traditions, and that's catastrophic on a civilization level. And so, yeah, animals and literally evolved from fungi, and fungi can still be one of those tools that were essential to the Rig Vedic tradition of yoga. And so, let's see. Yeah, so shamanism, things like shamanism and yoga are the cultural containers. And so what's happening, right, is that they're opening up what in science is called, it's opening up the sensory gates. And there's no longer any boundary between the self and the other, and everything is self, right? And so that literally is the goal of yoga. And the principle of Soma can help people have that realization and direct experience of that beingness, of that Purusha. And so I don't want to overemphasize this, but it is one of the tools. And so yajna would be the primary tool, especially in the Vedic perspective. And so yajna is a ritual. And so I just want to point out in the second bullet point that, yajnas are literally designed to purify the atmosphere and to bring about good rainfall and to develop a higher consciousness in society. And they've been used. And so there's actually been science on its effects and having anti-pollution effects. And so this is incredible. And this book is amazing. And so I'm going to try to wrap up real quick so I can leave time for questions. The field effects, like I said, right? There's field effects when we meditate, and when we do it in groups, that those effects are amplified. And the biggest study related to that is the Maharishi effect, which is really important in the yoga tradition. All right, and so a quick summary. So how can yoga heal the earth? Well, it can heal yourself and others. It can help provide, guide us to a more sustainable lifestyle, just chill out and meditate. Being a source of light. So it can literally help develop people to be a source of light and energy and consciousness, those sattvic emissions that the sutras talk about. Global synchronized meditations. It's literally a scientific way to accelerate our capacity to engage with these energies at a higher level, and to develop what are called the siddhis, even though it's this dangerous thing. And I've talked with a lot of people who have warned me not to talk about it. There are always exceptions. The exceptions are why we need to talk about it. Climate change is the exception. And so that's what I'll be talking about. So I'm super honored that I've been invited by Liz at Stonewave Yoga to teach climate change yoga in meditation on Monday at noon. So that'll involve probably about half asana, half meditation. And then on Thursday at 5:45, I'll be teaching, or I'll just be leading earth healing meditations. And so what we've been doing so far is just sort of rotating in the different types of meditations, because each person resonates with a different type. And so figuring out what resonates most for you, and just experimenting with that, with the varieties, especially mantra, in visualization again, and just spreading our light as the basic thing, and having an object of focus that we can synchronize with. So thank you so much for having. And my book is online for free. So if you went to climatechangeyoga.com, my book is a free PDF, and it is also available for sale at Stonewave Yoga. And so that is it. So the light in me sees and honors the light in all of you. Thank you so much for letting me be here and present this material. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Erik.
Thank you. I don't know how to get.
And we have a little time for questions or comments. So much really heavy and thought-provoking information. So anything coming up for any of you that you want to just say or share or ask a question?
Erik?
Yes.
Thank you so much for that. A very good talk with so much knowledge.
Thank you.
Thank you for sharing that. Is it okay if I bring up something that might be a little contrary?
Oh, absolutely, please. It's
probably a little late for a debate at this hour, but I guess what I wanted to bring to the discussion is this: that, and as you know, I've looked into this topic for many years as well. So we're both very immersed in it, and I'm very impressed with your how much you've studied and your knowledge. It's incredible. At the same time, and I also applaud anybody. I just want to say I applaud anybody who even gives a damn, I would have to say, because there are too many, I think there are just too many people right now with the crisis that's going on that just don't really, there's just too much apathy, basically. I think that's the number one hurdle. There's a lot of apathy or a lot of fear, which leads to apathy. But I guess what I'm bringing up that might be a little contrary, and you can address this if you want to, or we can talk about it in private another time, it's up to you, is that as much as what you've talked about, I think is very, very helpful on an individual basis and on a small community basis, I've never seen it historically work in a larger context. So what I mean is that all of the religions have had their shamans or their priests, and it's never really, from what I've seen historically, it's never really helped to pray against the mightier foe or against the majority. So the Jews fell to the Romans as much as they prayed. They still lost their homeland and their temple. The Christians fell to the outsiders, even though the Christians were the dominant force and prayed to God. The natives fell to the Europeans, the Mayans fell, the Maoris fell. So all these people had their prayers as well. And now we have the largest countries in the world are some of the biggest consumers, including India, where all of this is coming from that you're talking about. India itself is not really on board with what you're talking about anymore. They are very much trying to catch up with us as far as mass consumption and using energy.
Yeah, they want to build a bunch more coal plants, which would completely undermine this.
Right. So exactly. So as much as you've said, you've made it very clear that we're in a crisis situation, and this crisis situation has only occurred in the blink of an eye in human history. It's only happened in the last 250 years or so, which means that in another 250 years, if we don't really change our ways, we might have undeniable, climate refugees, climate change, things that we can't get out of. So I guess what I'm bringing up is, since prayer, I've never really seen prayer work in any religion on a mass scale, except for anecdotal evidence. And we all have to put our energy somewhere. As I said, I really applaud you for putting your energy into this. And I think the more people that do this, the better. I still think that, in my opinion, that if people don't get off their butts and do something action-oriented within the world, I don't see how the chanting is going to save us when there's so many billions of people who are not going to take part in that. And even if they did, I'm not sure we have the evidence to see that will shift the weather.
And so I'm going to jump in just as the co-facilitator here. Because
that's a great comment. Thank you.
And thank you, Michael. I think that, Michael, I'm hearing you, and I think that there's something goes like this. When we start to focus on the interoceptive and the spiritual connections, that is what starts to change us from the inside out. And so even if we take action outwardly, if we're not doing anything inwardly to actually make that authentic and real, we're going to fall short. And we fall short constantly. And that's why we're not seeing any results, because we haven't taken the spiritual aspect of the call for prayer or change really, truly from the inside out. So if we're going through these fads or these trends where we're like, okay, recycle, or okay, shut your lights, all of those are good things. I'm not making light of them. But if we're not doing it from like a true, deep, authentic, convicted place, it falls flat. And that's why I also, Michael, agree with you. There's been a lot of fails on this, but I sense that this is a call to action to go a little bit deeper. And so, Melissa, I see your comments on this. It's not about meditation not making a difference, right? It's about intention. And so nothing makes a difference if our intention isn't pure, and if it's not there, nothing makes a difference, not even our actual physical actions. So I think this is a call to action. And I think Erik is I know Erica is not the only one that's tapping into this right now. I've spoken to so many people. I'm seeing so many things coming up right now. It's this kind of almost like awakening that's starting to happen, where at the deepest levels, we're saying, hold on a minute. We need to really be digging deep first within ourselves, so that when we pray, when we act, whatever it is we choose to do to make a difference, it's authentic. It's coming from a real place, because that's the energy shift we need. Does that make sense?
I completely agree with all of that. Yeah.
Yeah. And so I what I like about what Erik presents is like, it's that call to action. And okay, a little note on India. This is you all know I study interreligious, like behavior and ancient religions. As a Christian, I can say a lot of times today, you're looking at the ancient scriptures of a religion, and they're pure and they're great. And they've been so diluted, messed up, disassembled, and flattened. And so unfortunately, when you say what you say, Michael, it is true. There are certain actions or activities that India today is taking that don't reflect at all the ancient wisdom of their scriptures and their kind of core. And I could say that about Christianity, sadly, as well. In certain aspects, not all. Same for Judaism and others, where we see these like this dilution over time. And it's sad, but there is something about, right, like going back to your roots. And that's literally what I feel like Mother Earth is asking us to do, is go back to our roots. And when we go back to our roots, we look at the indigenous behavior, which was spiritual, physical, mental. It was textured. It was deep. It had aspects. We're very one-dimensional these days. And that's why I think we're not being successful.
Can I jump
Anyone
in
else
real
want
fast?
to jump in? Yes, please do.
I just want to say something really, really, really fast. And this is also going to be slightly controversial, I'm sure. But I do find that, especially in Erik's talk and even yours just now, Liz, we're talking about going back to the indigenous. We're talking about things that tribes that have been wiped out by conquerors already knew and were doing. And now those same voices, those same tribes of indigenous people, we're not really following them. We're still following, you could say, the lead of those who have led us down this road in the first place. So like, where do we actually get the historical voices of those spoken mantras that were passed down before those tribes were destroyed? Where do we get that leadership? How do we bring that in? Because once we can get there and they can connect with people that actually really believe in this, I feel like it would be a bigger push than trying to it's like we're kind of trying to convince from top down instead of getting bottom up and going with those leaders that we actually decimated their practices over time. Why aren't we elevating those voices?
I actually have a fun answer to that question. So I did an environmental conservative thing in New Zealand a few years ago, and I lived with the Maori people there. And on like a small scale, and I would say it's a bit diluted as well, but the mainstream, known as like the Kiwis, so basically the white people, the Kiwis are like adopting the Maori's ideology in some respects. And I mean, like they kind of promote it as like a tourism thing, but a lot of Maori are actually working in the Department of Conservation in New Zealand, and they're like aiding like new, I don't want to say theories, but new policies and stuff going forward and having to change the scope of New Zealand. I actually was fortunate enough to write my honors thesis on this as well, so I could go on for a really long time. But yeah, it was kind of cool how they would adopt it. But it was like watered down, a little bit more digestible for like the average person that wasn't Indigenous. But living with the Indigenous people was amazing. I learned so much, and it was like so great.
Thank you, Laura. I just wanted to reiterate one thing in case it was missed. I wouldn't be contrary to anything you're saying, Erik, or to what Cara is saying either, or Liz, if it wasn't such a crisis situation. When we come to a point where things are coming to the edge or coming to a point where there might be, you know, massive, then you have to combat that, in my opinion, with real action, with something that is more, maybe I'm just too logical, but something that's more proven, in my opinion. So then what Cara was just talking about is a wonderful thing. But again, New Zealand is a very open-minded community. It's a small community. It's much more balanced when it comes to ecology. But most of the other countries that are huge or underdeveloped, what their priority is to catch up with the United States, because we've been living large for such a long time, and we have, I don't remember the statistic, but something like 6% of the population here that uses about 50% of the energy. So they're not seeing this as, oh, let's get rid of our cell phones and let's downgrade. They're seeing it as, let's play catch up with the United States. And it would be nice if the United States led the way on a conscious level, but I don't see any of that happening in time to save anybody. So that's where I'm coming from, that if it wasn't a crisis, it might be different. But I think at this point, we're not going to be able to count on this to save anyone.
Yeah. I mean, I wonder, Michael, this though, what is it that we can do, that we can all agree on, action-wise, that would work, that isn't spiritually based and grounded in a mutual goal and wisdom and focus? We have so many different opinions of what is the solution. We have so many different opinions of like, what will fix this? And and that is the question I have, you know.
I think everything Erik spoke about is our solutions. Just, you know, everyone has to find they fit into that, I guess.
Yeah. So in action and taking action and doing the things, again, I just kind of, and you know, maybe I'm not doing a great job articulating it. There has to be a strong foundation within yourself, because otherwise I watch people all the time. We get excited about things and then we get bored. We go to the next shiny penny. We get swayed by what the news says. And that's why we're not being successful. So there's something that the Indigenous had, I think, that was so remarkable. And that was this real strength and connection to divine that made us really, really strong in our convictions and steady. And I think that pairing is what we need, because just doing the actions, I worked for Global Green for 8 years and just watched, I even watched that staff come in and out, people super excited right out of college. Yeah, I got this. And then they just fade out. They're bored. They're on to the next thing. So what is it that's going to root us down, really connect us to Mother Earth and be more committed and convicted that we have to do this work? Question mark.
I just want to mention that, so speaking of the larger scale effects, the Maharishi study was about a group of meditators going around to different cities, and they would reduce crime rates and other metrics measured by the FBI. And so what they found essentially is that when the square root of 1% of a population is engaged in meditation, it has noticeable effects on society. And if this held true on a larger scale, the implication is that we would need less than 10,000 people to engage in these practices on a regular basis. And so maybe that's true, maybe that's not. I think worst case scenario, we get 10,000 people who awaken to moksha and liberation. And it's a worthwhile endeavor and worthwhile project, right? And so the Bhagavad Gita even tells us, you do it because it's right, and you, regardless of the result, regardless of the ends. And so that's part of what can be so challenging. It's why would I even engage with this if it's futile? Well, you do it because it's the right thing to do. And I think in personally, I think 10,000 people is totally reasonable. You see the amount of people protesting for climate change, millions of people are so engaged in this and so psyched for leadership and for a real solution. I think that something like this could easily snowball and catalyze a global shift with just a few thousand people. But yeah, absolutely. Like everything you said, Michael, is totally legit. I agree with what you're saying. But I also think that that there is, I don't know, like I find yoga incredibly idealistic, and I think idealism trumps realism, and we know that through quantum physics. Like we literally know that idealism is more powerful than realism as a philosophy, and that's why I love Hegel, sort of representing the apex of the Enlightenment era in Europe. But in the idealism means that like you can literally have an effect on reality with consciousness, and that there's a metaphysical background to the worlds, and when we engage with that, profound shifts can happen, that are like literally unknowable. But yeah, I'd love to hear anyone else's comments.
Yeah, one thing I was going to just comment on, and when we started talking about the religions and praying and all of these things, why isn't it having an effect? And we've been doing this for so long, and we still have gotten to the same results. And one of the things that I think is important that we begin to, just as human beings, begin to realize that, religion, we have come to take it as a singularity. It's one or the other. We've learned how to say, this is my religion, this is what I believe in, and that's all fine and good. But ultimately, when we get into spirituality, and when we talk about why isn't this working, is because it's ultimately the higher consciousness that we are trying to realize. And there's not one specific religion that's doing it better or more than another, and we've gotten so locked into, this is mine, that's yours, this is what I believe, this is what you believe, and that's all kind of cool. But when it goes into these bigger concepts, like these global concepts, and how do we fix these global problems, and we want to initiate yoga and meditation into all of that. One of the things that yoga actually teaches us is the first thing is unity, and the first part of that is all of the religions are correct. None of them. There's nothing that's not correct. And if we get into this universal consciousness, and if we get into the consciousness of all is love and all is light, and then we start praying on that, and we start believing in that, it doesn't really matter what religion you belong to. You start to believe in this higher consciousness, in this realm of being, and light is light. It doesn't matter if you're Christian or Jewish or Muslim or whatever, wherever you're coming from, or atheist or any of that. The only thing that begins to matter is we all have this conscious light that surrounds us, and that is part of the universe. Much like the slides that you showed, and this is a large part of the science that I dig, is that we're all these electromagnetic beings, and all of that is surrounded by not only the earth, but it's surrounded by our entire universe. We're part of that, so the universe isn't counting, the universe isn't saying, are you Christian? The universe isn't saying, are you Jewish? The universe isn't asking you, can you speak Sanskrit or not? The universe is saying, do you believe in light? And when we start actually all coming together as that, and I think that's where we start to have this misconception about, oh, we tried to pray and we tried to be spiritual, well, maybe we haven't come together as far as one universal consciousness, which doesn't care who you're praying to, whether it's this God or that God. You know, we're believing in the ultimate God, which is our universal being, and that lives within all of us and transcends, just like you said, transcends outside of all of us into the universe that we belong to.
Absolutely. Yeah, it's so well said. I love it. Yeah, absolutely. Totally agree. And well, part of what I take away from that is that, you know, the power of that love and light in that truth is more powerful than the ignorance and the darkness. In that light and truth and love is a more powerful force, and that's why I'm more optimistic than how Michael sort of framed it. Like, there are so many reasons to be negative about this situation, but I think that, especially from the yoga tradition, right, there's cycles of yugas, and right now we're going through this transition from ignorance to knowledge, from darkness to light, and in those powers of knowledge and light are more powerful, and so that's why this will work. Because it's grounded in truth. All right, well, thank you so much. I realize that we're sort of over time, so I'll stop talking. Thank you all.
Thank you, Eric. Thanks so much for facilitating this.
This is the best, Eric. Thank you so much.
Thank you, Eric.
Yeah.
Thank you, Eric.
Take care, Eric.
Thank you all so much.
Thank you, everyone. Thank you, Eric.
Thank you,
Michael. Thank you, Liz. Thank you, all my peeps.